Hi everybody, I want to talk today about a grammatical idea that most English speakers have never heard of, but that turns out to be one of the more philosophically interesting things that human languages do. It's called inalienable possession, and it has nothing to do with the invasion of the body snatchers. Although, once you know about it, you do start seeing it everywhere. So let's start with a simple question. What's the difference between my car and my hand? What's the difference between a duck? One of its legs is each the same. Obviously, one of them is attached to my body and one of them isn't. I can sell my car, I can lose my car, I can lend my car to a friend who will definitely not return it with the full tank, but my hand is in some deep sense just me. It's a part of me. Now, here's the thing. English doesn't really care about that distinction, grammatically speaking. We say my car and my hand exactly the same way. The word my does all the work in both cases, and the language just makes no distinction. But a huge number of the world's languages treat those two types of possession as fundamentally different things. And they encode that difference right into the grammar. That's the concept of inalienable possession, which is a lot harder to say when you try to say it on camera. Inalienable. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and here on the channel I discuss everything related to language, linguistics, language learning, and culture. If you're into those topics, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. This video's for you, Martin. This is Language Jones. Let me give you a more precise definition. In linguistics, inalienable possession refers to a relationship between a possessor and a possessed thing, possessum, that is considered inherent, permanent, or inseparable. The classic examples are body parts, your arm, your nose, your liver. But it also typically includes kinship relations, your mother, your child, your sibling, and in many languages, things like part-whole relationships, or even mental and emotional states. Alienable possession, by contrast, is everything else. Things you own, things you've acquired, things that are yours by circumstance rather than by nature. And in languages that mark this distinction, these two categories get different grammatical treatment. Sometimes that means different possessive suffixes. Sometimes it means different word order. Sometimes it means the possessed noun simply cannot appear in the sentence without a possessor. It's grammatically incomplete on its own. Let me give you some real examples because this is where it gets really interesting. In many Polynesian languages, including Hawaiian and Māori, there are two completely different separate sets of possessive markers. One set for alienable things, one set for inalienable things. In Hawaiian, you use ko or ka for inalienable possession, and no or na for alienable possession. So a child, a body part, a feeling, those take one set of markers. A house, a canoe, a book, those take a different set entirely. Now here's where things get culturally interesting. Which category a noun falls into isn't always obvious from a purely logical standpoint. It reflects the worldview and the cultural priorities of the speech community. In some Polynesian languages, for example, your canoe is considered an inalienable possession. The argument is that this is because it's so central to your identity and livelihood that it's treated as a part of you, not just something you happen to own. In many Native American languages, body part terms literally cannot appear without a possessive prefix. I first learned about this with respect to Ojibwe, but it's evidently very widespread. You can't just say hand as a standalone noun. The word is inherently relational. It has to be somebody's hand. The grammar is just encoding the fact that a hand without a body is not really a hand in any meaningful sense. Some languages go even further. In Haida, a language spoken in what is now British Columbia, and whose name I almost undoubtedly mispronounced, there are nouns that linguists call obligatorily possessed. They always appear with a possessive marker and can't grammatically stand alone. Many of these are body parts, but it also includes things like shadows and reflections, which, if you think about it, really do have that same kind of inherent inseparable quality. And in many languages across Africa, the Americas, and Oceania, kinship terms work the same way. You can't just say mother in the abstract. You have to say my mother, or his mother, or somebody's mother. A mother's always somebody's mother. Shout out to all the moms out there. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Inalienable possession doesn't just affect possessive markers. It interacts with other parts of grammar in ways that you might not expect. Let me give you two of my favorite examples. Definiteness and what linguists sometimes call the possessive dative. And when I was brainstorming for the script, Gemini called it the ethic dative, which is completely wrong. Don't use LLMs for linguistics. Let's start with definiteness. In English, when something is definite, when both the speaker and listener know which specific thing we're talking about, we use the word the word the. The car, the book, the idea. Entire books have been written about definiteness, like Definiteness by Christopher Lyons, and I've even done some co-authored work on definiteness that was so dense that the conference talk for it is one of my all-time worst performing videos. It's a whole world of study. But anyway, in some languages, inalienable nouns interact with definiteness in a really striking way. Take Zulu. Zulu has a system of noun classes and definiteness marking, but kinship terms, your mother, your father, your grandmother, I think, don't take the usual definiteness morphology. They behave as though definiteness is already inherent. You don't say umama wami, you say umama. Though this is actually changing in urban Zulu under influence from English, so there's a whole sociolinguistic study that could probably be done looking at urban and deep Zulu, and I would bet on the definiteness marker for kinship terms being a site of linguistic identity and persona construction. But returning to traditional deep Zulu grammar, that's what they call it, that makes a certain intuitive sense. When you say mother, umama, there's one mother who's much more salient. The kinship relationship itself uniquely identifies the referent. Hebrew works similarly. Modern Hebrew marks definiteness with the prefix ha, or a. So sefer is a book and hasefer is the book. But kinship terms in the first person, ima for mother, abba for father, typically appear without ha, even when they're clearly definite. You don't say aima sheli, the mother of mine, in casual speech. You just say ima sheli. And the definiteness is implicit. The inalienable relationship makes explicit definiteness marking feel redundant, almost strange. Before the pedants in the audience leave me a comment, yes, there's also the historical fact that ima and abba, mommy and daddy, are borrowed from Aramaic. The words from Hebrew are em and av. And the Aramaic borrowings actually have the definiteness marker on them in Aramaic. It's the final aleph. But this is completely opaque to children learning the language, and probably like 90% of my audience. So in both these cases, the language is essentially saying some nouns are so inherently tied to a specific person that ordinary definiteness marking doesn't really apply to them. They're definite by their very nature. And that brings us to the possessive dative. No, it's not when the girl you've been seeing reads your texts and demands to know who the other women are. That's dating someone who's possessive. If you've ever studied a Romance language, you've probably encountered, well, both. Anyway, in French, if you want to say, I broke my hand, you don't say, j'ai cassé ma main. Literally, I broke my hand. Well, you can, and people will understand you, but they will imagine a scenario like you're an artist and you own a wooden model hand and you dropped it and it broke, and not that you dropped it on your own hand and broke a bone. The more natural and idiomatic way to say it is, je me suis cassé la main. Literally, I broke me the hand. You use a reflexive pronoun, me, meaning something like to myself or for myself, and then the body part takes a definite article, la, rather than a possessive like my. By the way, your mileage may vary, but I always find it fun and useful to translate foreign grammatical structures into the closest parallel I can think of, even or especially if it's non-standard and colorful. So I get something like, done broke me a hand. Ow. But that's neither here nor there. Returning to Romance, is that what a possessive suitor would say? Italian works the same way. Mi sono rotto la mano. I broke myself the hand. Not my hand, the hand, with a reflexive pronoun doing the work of signaling that it's my hand. This pattern is all over Romance languages when it comes to body parts. All over body parts. Romance. You don't wash your hands in French. I mean, you do wash your hands. You just wash yourself the hands. You don't brush your teeth, you brush yourself the teeth. The body part takes the definite article, not the possessive, because whose hands or teeth could they possibly be? Whose teeth are you brushing? They're yours, dummy. The possessive would actually be pragmatically redundant. The definiteness marking plus the reflexive pronoun together do the job just fine. Mi hai spezzato il cuore. Now, that's a possessive dative. What's happening here is that the body parts, basically the textbook definition of inalienable possessions, are being treated as inherently linked to the person performing the action, or experiencing the action. You don't need to say, my. The inalienability is encoded not through a special possessive form, but through the absence of an explicit possessive, combined with a different set of grammatical structures. This is a great example of how the same underlying idea, this thing is inherently part of you, can surface in completely different grammatical structures across different languages. So why does any of this matter? A few reasons. First, it tells us something about how language relates to the way we think about the world. The distinction between things that are part of me and things that I happen to have is a meaningful conceptual distinction. Most languages just don't grammaticalize it, but the ones that do are essentially forcing their speakers to make that categorization every single time they talk about possession. Second, it's yet another example of how English is not the default. English is a perfectly cromulent language, but it's also a fairly impoverished one when it comes to this particular dimension of meaning. The fact that English uses my for both your kidney and your rental car is a quirk of English, not some universal logical truth. Lots of languages just encode things differently and more explicitly than English does. Third, and this is where we get into dangerous conceptual territory, inalienable possession maybe shows us that grammar can relate to philosophy or worldview. The idea that some relationships are inherent and some are contingent, that some things belong to you by nature and others only by circumstance, that's getting into a metaphysical distinction. Some languages force you to think about such things, and some don't. It's important to note, though, that the thinking is usually so routine as to be unconscious and automatic, and no language prevents you from thinking about such things. So again, no Sapir-Whorf here. No, not that Whorf. And fourth, as we've just seen, this one semantic distinction can propagate outward through a whole grammatical system. It affects how you mark possession, yes, but it also affects how you mark definiteness, how you use reflexive pronouns, whether you need an article or a possessive or neither. Inalienability is more than just a single grammatical feature. It touches on a whole range of conceptually related grammatical structures. It's a window into cognition. Language typologists might have something to say in terms of implicational scales here. I should probably make a video about that. If you want to get a basic grounding in linguistics, by the way, across all subfields, I'm launching a self-paced digital course later this year. You can sign up for the waitlist and for updates at www.languagejones.com/blueprint. Now, there's one caveat worth mentioning here. The boundary between alienable and inalienable isn't always clear-cut, even within a single language. Languages vary a lot in exactly which categories count as inalienable. Emotions? Sometimes inalienable, sometimes not. Cultural objects with deep personal significance depends on the language. And there's a lot of ongoing debate in linguistics about exactly how to define and classify these systems. But the core insight is that many of the world's languages draw a grammatical line between things that are a part of you and things that you own. And that line reveals something interesting about how humans conceptualize the relationship between a person and the world around them. So next time someone says my hand or my mother in English, and it sounds completely unremarkable, just remember that in a big chunk of the world's languages, those sentences are completely different compared to my car or my umbrella. And in languages like French, they're not even saying my hand at all. They're saying the hand to me. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in more concepts from linguistics and linguistic typology, the study of what kinds of patterns show up across the world's languages, let me know in the comments. There is so much more where this came from. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you can support it on YouTube with super thanks or over on Patreon at patreon.com/languagejones. Please leave me a comment. They are great for the algorithm, and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, happy learning.